Well, I invite you to get out your Bible and turn to James chapter 3. If you have not already, James chapter 3 is where we're going to be continuing our journey through James tonight. And it is a really important and good chapter for us to be spending some time on this evening. You know, in my family, I have 2 cousins and 1 uncle who are firemen. And what that means is that there is no safer place to roast a turkey at Thanksgiving than at our family get-togethers. And it also means that it's very difficult to have the coolest story to tell at a holiday get-together too, because there is just something really striking, something awe-inspiring and gripping about the power of a fire. And they have stories, my cousins, my uncle, they could tell you stories all day long about amazing things that they have seen and done as people whose job is to put out fires, more than I could ever tell. But I did have an opportunity just a few summers ago to get a little glimpse of this myself. Now, some of you, I know, will remember that just a few summers ago, we had a fire like right here on the street where the church building is. And I remember that day so distinctly. It just so happened that I was in the back parking lot of College Hill right when that thing started going. That summer we were doing the summer lunch program, you may remember. We were setting up lunch. I was with Alyssa. Alyssa also had the 2 little 4-year-old twin boys that she kept throughout that summer with her in the car. And I remember crossing the street, approaching the yard of that house. You could hear the sirens revving up in the distance, but they weren't there yet. I remember standing like at the threshold of the open front door of this burning house and shouting in through the door to see if anybody was still in there. And a few seconds later, the last person in the house came out of the house. And I was nowhere really near the fire myself, but like, boy, even just standing there at the door, just feel that heat. You could just feel that power. And I remember when I got back to the College Hill parking lot and I saw the 2 boys and they were still sitting safely in the car, but boy, like eyes like saucers. Well, one of them. The other one was just like playing with a Happy Meal toy like nothing was going on around him. But the one who saw it, boy, he was just like astounded by this fire and apparently kind of frustrated with me because he started lecturing me the second I got back. He was wagging his finger at me saying, "That is not your job. Your job is to sit in your office and write sermons." He was just so scared and so shocked by it all. Because even from far away, safely tucked away in the car, there's such an alarming power to that fire. I can't imagine the courage it takes if it is your job, if your job's not just to sit in your office and write sermons, to actually go into that burning building. You know, the thing that really stands out to me about that experience was that you and I already know that fire is immensely powerful and that it's so very destructive. That's not news to you. We already know that, but you know, it's one thing to know it, and it's a whole other thing, like a really surreal experience to feel it. Like to be looking up and seeing that smoke billow from the roof and to feel that heat and actually like see with your eyes that destructive power. Like we all know that. But it's one thing to know it, and it's like another thing entirely when you feel it. And I think that is what James chapter 3 is trying to do for us. You know, James chapter 3 is a passage that tells us something that you and I already know. Like even if you were just picking up a Bible for the very first time in your entire life and you had not read James chapter 3 before, it would still be telling you something that you probably already know. The message of James chapter 3 is about how difficult it is to always say what you want to say, to always speak like you ought to speak, like say those things that are good and not those things that are bad. And that's something we all already know. But James is trying to do more than just tell us what we know. I'd like to start in verse 2 because this is the part of the passage where James is going to say something here that, boy, if there's anything that can be said that we all already know, it's this, right? James chapter 3, verse 2 begins this part of the passage. It says, we all stumble in many ways. And you hear that, you can't help but nod your head at this. Like James is getting us all on the same page. He's saying the obvious thing. We all stumble in many ways, including, James would actually say, especially in the things that we say, in the way that we speak, which is what he says next. He says, for we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, well, that is a perfect man. Is that same word perfect he used in chapter 1 when he said, consider it pure joy when you face trials because, perseverance, when it's finished with its work, it will make you mature and complete, like perfect and complete, not lacking in anything. And here James is saying, like, if somebody really learns to master what they say, well, that's the mature and complete person. Like, that's a perfect person. He says this knowing full well that we all stumble in many ways. He says this knowing full well what a tall task that is. But of course, we already know that too. James begins this chapter by saying what we already know. Words. Our words can so easily get out of control. We say the things we shouldn't say. We say the things we don't want to say. We know that. But then for the rest of the chapter, James says, I take this as James saying, I know you know that, but I want you to feel it. I want you to feel that with me. So from this point forward in the chapter, he gives us not one, not two, but eight metaphors, like 8 little word pictures to help draw us in and help us feel what we know about the power, even the destructive power of the tongue. So the first one he gives us is it's like a bit in the mouth of a horse, which will mean something to you if you're someone who rides horses a lot. I know we're in Texas, but I can't help you all that much with this one. I have ridden a horse a time or two in my life, but it's not been since I was very little. My granddad, from time to time, would take me to ride Honey, this really calm, docile horse. I do remember one particular time that I was hanging on tight to Honey because calm little Honey decided to rear up those front legs and kick its legs and start to take off. And little Stephen was just holding on. And it was very clear to Stephen at that moment that there was nothing I could do to control this big, mighty animal. But James is saying that like even just that little bit at the end of the reins in the mouth of the horse, that little thing, it can control this mighty animal. It can steer you right, or it can steer you wrong. And that's what the tongue is. It's this little thing. It can steer you right. It can steer you wrong. So much power in it. It's like a ship. That's the next one. A ship is so large and driven by strong winds, James says, and yet same thing. It's guided by this very small rudder, which again sets the whole course of the ship. On course or off course. And the tongue is like that too. James says that little tongue, it can set the course of your life. Put it on course or throw it off. And then he gets to the big ones. These are probably the ones you might remember if you read this chapter a lot. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set amongst our members. It's just one part of our body, but it can stain the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life. Think about that ship. Think about that horse. The entire course of your life. And itself is set on fire by hell, James says. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. Wow. Heavy words. So you see what James is doing here, right? He says, I know that you know that your words can be destructive and hard to control. And we all stumble, especially in what we say. Like, I know that you know that, but do you remember what that feels like? I need you to remember what it feels like, James says. I want you to feel the heat, smell the smoke. I want you to think about a wild animal that can't be tamed. I want you to feel these things so that you can know how serious this is. The power of your words. Now, personally, I think that's a very effective strategy. Because just like how I know in my mind that a fire is destructive, but when I'm standing at that door that day, it's like a whole different experience. I know in my mind that words can be harmful, but it's a whole different thing when I stop and I actually think about sometimes the way words feel, isn't it? I remember a time, this is a long time ago, I said something hurtful, thinking I was out of earshot of someone, and then I watched as their head turned and looked at me. What does that feel like? Oh, it just crushed me. I felt so bad, instant remorse. And them too. It was just the kind of thing you replay in your mind a lot. You wish you hadn't done it. I remember a different time, I said something to somebody, didn't think a thing of it, and then a week or two later, they came to me, they said, what you said the other day really hurt me. And then my mind is racing. I'm thinking back to that moment. I'm trying to replay it in my mind. And as I hear what they're saying, I'm thinking, that's not what I meant to say at all. Not at all. But it doesn't change the fact that it hurt them. And so suddenly I'm feeling this weight on me. The weight of my words. Of course, we've all been on the other side of that too. On the other end of careless, harmful words, you know what that feels like. Probably don't have to tell you. An off-the-cuff remark, it can be really harmful. Some emails are better left unopened, right? And Mark mentioned Facebook posts that I think about Facebook posts kind of like a stray bullet. If they're harmful, it's almost like putting on a blindfold and shooting a gun because you can't know. You don't know who's going to be hit by those words. You don't look into the eyes of the person who's going to read those words. Arguments sometimes start small, but then they burn out of control. I know you know these things already. For some of you, this is the zillionth time you've heard a sermon on James 3. For that, I'm sorry. I'm not telling you anything new. James is not telling you anything new either. But I think he's right. I think every now and then, as difficult as it is, it might be important that we remember what it feels like. That we feel the heat and see the smoke. Because when we remember what it feels like, when words are careless, when they're sharp, when they're poisonous, when we remember the power that our tongue really has, maybe that's when we're more ready to do what James says everybody's got to do. It says, let every person be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. Let every person be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. This is what we're called to be. And James chapter 3, I think, is helping us to be what we're called to be, because it's helping us to remember that feeling of costly, careless words. And I know that may not be a pleasurable thing to do, but it may be an important thing every now and then for us to do, to remember what it feels like. And then, James issues this challenge. I'd like to close with this tonight. And when James issues this challenge, he kind of frames it like a negative, but for tonight, I want to take the same teaching and turn it into a positive for us tonight. And maybe it can be a great encouragement to us as we go forth from this place. Now, this challenge, the rest of this chapter comes with some word pictures too. I told you that there were 8 metaphors, 8 little word pictures that James gives us in this chapter. Well, we've looked at 5 of them so far. The last 3 are here in this challenge at the end. This time it's plants and it's water. Plants and water. I've been thinking a lot about plants here lately. Any of you lose any plants during the ice storm? I spent a few hours Monday night with the joyful task of digging out the bushes in our flower bed that had died during the ice storm. And Alyssa was off doing her part by going and getting the new plants that were going to go in the flower bed. And when she got back, I may have come to realize that some of the plants I'd spent like an hour digging up may not have actually been dead, but they looked kind of dead, but they weren't actually dead, to which I said, they're dead now, let's move on. But we got all these beautiful new plants. And one of the plants we got is a hibiscus plant. Some of you may have these at your house. They have these beautiful blossoms on them. We got a couple for our back porch. They're really nice. Sit out there, sometimes read and look at the hibiscus plants. So you see here we've got one that's got the yellow looking bloom, and then this reddish pink one. And there's also these orange blooms. What's really cool about this plant is that those blooms are from the same plant. It's kind of cool. It actually has all 3 of those colors, like the yellow bloom and the reddish pink bloom and also the orange bloom, just like blossoming out of this one single bush. Kind of interesting to have all 3 of those things coming out of the same one. But of course, they're all hibiscus blooms. They all belong on the hibiscus plant. It's not exactly what James is talking about here, but James gives this analogy from plants at the end. He says, imagine you plant a fig tree. And then next thing you know, it spits out olives. Or imagine you had a grapevine, vineyard, and you look out there and it's got a bunch of figs on it. What did you think of that? Like, that's not supposed to be there. This is not how it's supposed to be. It's kind of like if you had a spring of water and at the same time it was spewing out fresh water over here and salt water over there. Like, springs just don't do that. They don't spit out salt water and fresh water. You don't get olives from fig trees. You don't get figs from grapevines. This is just not what it should be. And James says, look, it should not be this way with our tongues. We should not, from the same tongue, spout blessing and cursing. For with that one tongue, we bless our Lord and Father, but then with the same tongue, we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. Like, from the same mouth come blessing and cursing. And the thing he says is, this is not how it ought to be. Maybe those words hit especially home with us tonight, because, like, what have we spent the last hour doing? We've spent this wonderful time together using our tongues to bless God. We sang together tonight, Holy Lord, most holy Lord, you alone are worthy of my praise. We sang together with our tongues. We said, I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you. Take joy in what you hear. So here's my positive spin on James's challenge here. It's it's like, remember what that feels like too. So we did the hard thing. We spoke a moment ago about like what it feels like when words are destructive, when they're harmful, and when they hurt, and when you wish you hadn't said it, and we know what that feels like. My challenge is, remember what that worship felt like too. Remember what it feels like when words are used exactly how they're supposed to be used. Remember what it feels like when a really thoughtful word, an uplifting word, falls upon your ears. Like, remember what a beautiful thing your words can do. Proverbs says, like apples of gold and settings of silver. That's what a really fitting word is. And with our tongues, we bless our God. And as hard as it may be to tame that tongue and stop those bad things from happening, like what if we bottle up those good experiences when we use our words just like they're supposed to be used? Like what if we dwell on that and then try to bring that goodness to everyone in all that we say? James is telling us here what we shouldn't do. He says, don't bless and then curse. Don't bless God and then curse others. What we should do, what we can do, is bless and then bless some more. Bless and then bless some more. What if we viewed our worship that way? This time we spend together. What if it's not just like 1 hour out of the week isolated by itself where we use our words really well because we're praising God? Like, what if this was like the dress rehearsal, yeah? What if this was practice? What if this was like the contract we signed that says, this is the way I'm going to use my words all week long to bless and build up? What if this is where we charge our batteries and remember what words are for, to speak truth and spread love? And if I speak, 1 Peter says, I'm going to try to speak as one who speaks the very words of God. And if I speak, says Colossians, I'm going to try to let my conversations always be full of grace. And if I speak out there, I'm going to try to speak the way I do in here when I lift up my voice in song. I may not be singing when I'm out there, but I can use my voice that way. Blessing those we meet in our lives, just like we bless the Lord when we worship him here together. My challenge is, let's take that feeling with us too tonight. We talked about the tough feeling, the harmful feeling, the one we'd rather forget. I want us to take that feeling, the feeling of words used well, and remember what that feels like. Think about that heartfelt prayer that you whispered to God and nobody else heard it but God alone. Bottle up that feeling. Think about the time that you said, I love you, and it wasn't just like the habitual I love you. It was like, look into the eyes of your spouse or your friend or your son or your daughter. That one. Bottle up that feeling. Think about that time when somebody said to you and patted you on the back when you needed it and said, keep going. You're not in this alone. Think about the feeling of those words. Let's take that with us out of this room and into every single day. Words can be used for so many powerful, good things. What if we take that kind of speech and bring it into the world for everyone we know to hear and see? Wouldn't that be a beautiful thing? Maybe that's something that challenges you tonight. Maybe what you needed tonight was to revisit those tough feelings that we don't like to talk about, because it's an important reminder that we all have to be really careful with the way we speak, because sometimes the way we speak, it's hard to make it how we ought to speak, and sometimes it can do more harm than good. Maybe that's the reminder you need. Maybe what you needed tonight, I don't know what's going on this week, I don't know what's going on 10 minutes before you came in this door, but maybe what you needed tonight was to use your words well for just 1 hour in worship, blessing our God, and then be reminded your words can be a blessing every day when we learn to use them well. Maybe it's time for somebody who's here tonight to say those sweetest words of all when you confess that Jesus is Lord, Son of God. As you turn your life to him, you respond to him in his voice in baptism, and try to follow him with your life. We're going to sing a last song together here in just a moment, and as we do that, you're invited to respond to the message of this passage, this message about the power of our words. There's a line in this song I want you to pay special attention to. You're going to know the song, most of you. Lord, we come before thee now. There's a line in the second verse I really like. It says, tune our lips to sing your praise. My prayer is that God is going to tune our lips, not just here, but every day this week, to bless and bless again, and bless the people we speak to, just like we bless our God when we sing this song. Let's stand and sing together.